The Galactic Council thought we were soft. They looked at our heavily regulated trade agreements, our eager smiles, our desperate need to be accommodated, and labeled humanity a Tier 3 support species. They didn't know the smiles were a restraint mechanism. They didn't realize our eagerness to compromise was born from a deep, ancestral terror of what happens when we don't. Today, the Voran Armada broke through the Aegis line. And today, humanity finally stopped pretending. Kevin Marshall hated the collar of his dress uniform. It was stiff, starched to the point of structural integrity, and designed to make him look upright and rigid. It was part of the good neighbor doctrine. Stand tall, smile warmly, speak softly, never, ever raise your voice. He stood in the center of the sunken amphitheater of the Grand Assembly on Xylos Prime. The gravity here was roughly 10% heavier than Earth's, pulling at the bags under his eyes and making his joints ache. Above him, arranged in sweeping tiers of polished obsidian and glowing amber, sat the representatives of the Galactic Council. To them, Kevin was a curiosity, a mascot. "Ambassador Marshall," Counselor Vrek drawled. Vrek was a towering avian-reptilian hybrid, his feathers a shimmering, arrogant violet. His voice cascaded through the translation earpiece in Kevin's ear, dripping with condescension. "The Council notes Earth's request for a slight expansion in the Mauritius mining sector. However, we find your yield projections optimistic, and frankly, your species lacks the heavy-duty industrial shielding required for deep core extraction." Kevin forced a smile. It reached exactly halfway up his cheeks and stopped, a perfectly engineered expression of mild contrition. "We understand your concerns, Counselor. We merely thought that our automated drones might supplement the current quota. But, of course, we defer to the Council's expertise. We apologize for overstepping." Vrek made a clicking sound with his beak, a sound of dismissal. "Apology accepted, Ambassador. Just remember your place. Your people are excellent agriculturalists. Stick to farming." Kevin bowed his head. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth groaned, but he kept his eyes lowered. This was the lie. This was the grand, desperate charade humanity had played for 70 years. When Earth finally cracked faster-than-light travel and breached the galactic community, we expected a dark, hostile universe. We found bureaucrats. We found a coalition of ancient, highly advanced species who possessed technology that looked like magic, but who had entirely forgotten how to fight. They were civilized. They settled disputes through economic sanctions and proxy duels in heavily moderated arenas. They hadn't seen total war in 5,000 years. Humanity, fresh off a terrifyingly close brush with nuclear annihilation during the resource wars of the 22nd century, took one look at these peaceful, fragile giants and made a collective, terrified decision: hide the knives. If the Council knew our history, if they saw the unredacted archives of Verdun, Stalingrad, or the orbital bombardments of the Martian secession, they would glass Earth from orbit as a quarantine measure. So, humanity rebranded. We became the galaxy's golden retrievers, friendly, eager to please, and utterly harmless. We dismantled our dreadnoughts and built sleek, unarmed diplomatic cruisers. We exported grain, music, and art. We apologized for everything. "Are there any further matters?" Vrek asked, shuffling a stack of glowing datapads. Next to Vrek sat General Taurus, a member of the Kalan species. Taurus was built like a brick wall covered in gray scales, representing the Council's military branch. In reality, Taurus was a glorified police chief whose idea of combat was a synchronized space parade. Taurus looked bored. Kevin was about to step down from the podium when the light shifted. It wasn't a subtle change. The soft, ambient amber of the assembly hall violently snapped to a harsh, strobing crimson. The low hum of the climate control system was instantly drowned out by a sound Kevin hadn't heard since his military days on Earth. A klaxon. The heavy obsidian doors of the chamber blew open. A Kalen aide sprinted into the room, tripping over his own robes. His gray scales flushed a sickly, pale white. He didn't bother with the formal protocols. He didn't bow. "The Aegis line," the aide gasped, his voice cracking through the hall's amplifiers. "It's gone. The Vorn. They've broken through." The chamber erupted. Kevin didn't move. He just watched. He watched the polished veneer of the most powerful governing body in the galaxy crack and shatter in less than 10 seconds. The Vorn were a rumor, a ghost story whispered in the outer rim, a migratory swarm of biomechanical locusts that consumed entire star systems. The Council had dismissed them as a localized pirate threat. "Silence!" General Taurus bellowed, standing up. "Calm yourselves! The Aegis line is defended by the First Fleet. They will repel any incursion. Bring up the tactical display." A massive holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room, hovering right above Kevin's head. It displayed Sector 4, the edge of Council space. It was a bloodbath. Kevin's eyes tracked the data instinctively. He didn't see abstract symbols. He saw formations. The blue triangles of the Council's First Fleet were arranged in a beautiful, classical crescent formation. It was a textbook defensive posture, symmetrical, elegant, completely useless against a swarm. The red dots representing the Vorn didn't bother with formations. They poured into the system like water from a burst dam. They didn't target the heavily shielded dreadnoughts first. They swarmed the supply ships, the fragile communication relays, blinding the Council fleet before moving in to dismantle the heavy hitters. Kevin felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The Vorn weren't fighting a ritualized battle. They were fighting a war of extermination. "They fight like us," Kevin thought. "General," Kevin said, his voice surprisingly steady amidst the rising panic in the room. "Your flanks are exposed. You need to order your cruisers to break formation and form a defensive sphere around the dreadnoughts." Taurus glared down at him, his reptilian eyes flashing with insulted pride. "Be silent, human. You know nothing of naval warfare. This is a temporary setback. The First Fleet will hold." Kevin watched the hologram. A cluster of red dots hit the flagship's icon. The blue triangle flickered, then vanished. "No, General," Kevin said softly, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of history settling onto his shoulders. "They won't." By the third hour, the screaming had stopped, replaced by a stunned, horrifying silence. The Grand Assembly had been converted into a makeshift command center. Data pads littered the floor. The elegant sweeping desks of the delegates were covered in spilled kaf and discarded translation units. High Counselor Rek sat slumped in his chair, his vibrant violet feathers molting in patches from sheer stress. The holographic display hovering in the center of the room was no longer a tactical map. It was a casualty list. The First Fleet was gone. The Second and Fourth Fleets, rushed in to plug the gap, had been systematically butchered. The Vorn didn't accept surrender codes. They didn't open communication channels. They just advanced, a tidal wave of jagged black ships and boarding pods that chewed through the Council's elegant, plasma-shielded cruisers like foil. General Taurus was leaning over a console, his massive hands trembling. "How?" he whispered, the translation software barely catching his voice. "Our shields, they just ram them. They use their own destroyed vessels as kinetic weapons to batter down our deflectors. It's madness. There is no honor in this." Kevin stood in the corner, out of the way. He had unbuttoned his stiff collar. He was drinking cold, bitter caf from a plastic cup. He looked at the Kalan general. Honor. The word made Kevin sick. Honor was a luxury for those who had never fought in the mud, who had never had to choke the life out of someone over a ration of dirty water. The council fought with rules. The Vorn fought to win. "They're bypassing the military installations," an aide shouted from a lower tier. "They're ignoring the orbital defense platforms over Syria. They are gods. They are landing directly on the population centers." Vrek looked up, his eyes wide. "Why? Taking a planet requires a subjugation treaty. It takes months of negotiation." "They aren't taking it," Kevin said. The entire room turned to look at him. For the first time in 70 years, Kevin didn't soften his voice. He didn't smile. He stepped out of the shadows, walking toward the center of the room. "They aren't taking it," Kevin repeated, his voice flat, analytical, dead. "They are burning it. They don't want your infrastructure. They don't want your treaties. They want your biomass and your minerals. They are performing a planetary-scale scorched earth campaign to deny us safe harbor while simultaneously refueling their swarm." General Taurus sneered, though it lacked its usual bite. "And what does a dirt farmer know of such tactics? I know that if you don't pull your remaining fleets back to the choke point at the Helion Gate, you're going to lose the core worlds," Kevin said, pointing a finger at the holographic map. "You're sending your ships in piecemeal. You're trying to save every colony. You can't. You have to sacrifice the rim to buy time to fortify the core." Vrek stood up, his voice trembling with outrage. "Sacrifice? Billions of citizens? We do not abandon our own. We are the Galactic Council. You're a corpse if you don't," Kevin shot back. "Look at the map. They are drawing your fleets out, stretching your supply lines, and cutting you to pieces. You are playing a game of chess, and they are flipping the board and burning the pieces." "Enough!" Taurus slammed his fist onto the console. "I will not be lectured on warfare by a species whose greatest military achievement is an efficient tractor. We will hold the line at Syria. We will send the Royal Guard." Kevin closed his eyes. The Royal Guard, painted ships with ceremonial halberds. "They'll be slaughtered," Kevin said quietly. "Then they will die with honor," Taurus replied, turning his back on the human. Kevin stood there for a long moment. He looked at the alien leaders. They were terrified, outmatched, and completely unwilling to face the reality of the universe. They were soft, and they were going to die. Kevin walked back to his designated seating area. He reached into his briefcase. Past the trade agreements, past the agricultural quotas, and past the endless pages of diplomatic apologies. He found a small, heavy black device. It looked like an archaic radio transmitter. It had no sleek lines, no glowing touch screens. It was made of dull, cold steel, and it had a single, physical switch covered by a heavy red guard. He stared at it. If he flipped that switch, he couldn't unflip it. Humanity's mask would drop. The galaxy would see us not as the friendly farmers, but as the apex predators of a death world who had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of slaughter. They would never trust us again. We would be pariahs, monsters. The hologram flashed. The colony world of Syria blinked red. Then it went dark. 3 billion lives gone. The casualty counter rolled over so fast the numbers blurred. Vrek collapsed into his chair, covering his face with his talons. A low, keening sound of pure grief filled the chamber. Taurus stared at the empty space where the planet had been, his jaw slack. Kevin picked up the device. He flipped the red guard up. God forgive us, he thought, but they need a monster. The silence in the council chamber was heavy, suffocating. The air smelled of burnt ozone from overworked servers and the sour pheromones of terrified alien species. Kevin Marshall pressed his thumb onto the biometric scanner of the black device. A tiny green light blinked on. He pulled a wired earpiece from the side and slotted it into his ear, ignoring the high-tech universal translator resting on his desk. He pressed the transmission button. He didn't use the secure, multi-layered quantum encryption the Council used. He used a tight beam, low-frequency pulse. To the alien sensors in the room, it would register as background cosmic radiation. "This is Station Actual," Kevin said. His voice was no longer the melodic, carefully modulated tone of an ambassador. It was a gravelly, flat bark. Static hissed in his ear. Then a voice cut through, deep, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. "Go ahead, Actual. This is Command. We have a code black scenario. The Aegis line has fallen. The Vorn swarm is pushing toward the Helion Gate. The Council forces are ineffective. Projected casualty rate of the core worlds is 100% within 48 hours. There was a pause on the line, just the faint hiss of the void. "Understood, Actual. What is your recommendation?" Kevin looked up. The holographic map showed the red tide of the Vorn shifting, reorienting. They were locking onto the massive energy signature of Xylos Prime, the capital. They were coming here. General Taurus was quietly giving orders to his aides, orders to evacuate the Council, orders to abandon the billions of civilians on the planet below. They were running. Kevin squeezed the transmitter. "I am authorizing Protocol 0. Another pause, slightly longer this time. "Actual, confirm. You are requesting the lifting of the good neighbor doctrine? We are dropping the veil?" "Confirmed," Kevin said, staring directly at the back of Rex's head. "The leash is off. Send the fleet. Send everything." "Godspeed, Kevin. Command out." Kevin pocketed the device. He took a deep breath, feeling his chest expand. The stiff collar dug into his neck. He reached up, grabbed the heavy fabric, and ripped it open, sending 2 decorative buttons pinging across the obsidian floor. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms scarred from his time in the orbital drop-shock infantry, scars he usually covered with makeup. He walked up to the central command console. "General Taurus," Kevin said. Taurus didn't look up. "Ambassador, please, we are initiating emergency evacuation protocols. Get to your designated transport." "Cancel the evacuation," Kevin said. The tone of his voice made Taurus freeze. It wasn't loud, but it carried a density, a sheer, unyielding weight that the alien had never heard from a human before. Vrek lifted his head, his tired eyes squinting at Kevin. "What did you say?" Taurus asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I said cancel it. Keep your remaining ships in orbit to evacuate the wounded. The defense of the Helion Gate is being handled." Vrek let out a bitter, cracking laugh. "Handled? By whom? The gods? There is nothing left between the Helion Gate and this planet. There is us, Kevin said. Taurus stood up to his full towering height, his chest puffing out. You, humanity, do not waste my time with your delusions of grandeur. You have a few dozen pleasure cruisers and automated cargo haulers. The Vorn will swat you like insects. General, Kevin said, stepping closer, completely unafraid of the alien brute. 70 years ago, when we met you, we found a galaxy of scholars and artists. You had built a paradise. We didn't want to ruin it, so we hid what we were. Kevin tapped a few keys on the console, overriding Taurus's lockouts. He routed a feed from the deep space telemetry buoys at the Helion gate to the main holographic display. We didn't dismantle our military, General. We just parked it where you wouldn't look. On the hologram, the Helion gate, a massive swirling vortex of blue slipspace energy began to distort. Telemetry shows a mass anomaly at the gate, an aide stammered, frantically pushing buttons. It's huge. Council registry doesn't recognize the signatures. It's not a fleet. The blue vortex turned violent purple, then tore open. The ships that slid out of the slipspace rupture were not the elegant, gleaming silver teardrops of the human diplomatic corps. They were ugly. They were brutal, angular slabs of depleted uranium armor and dark matter shielding, painted pitch black to absorb radar. They had no sweeping curves, no aesthetic designs. They were built for one singular purpose: surviving a beating and delivering death. Hundreds of them poured through the gate, destroyers, cruisers, and then the dreadnoughts. They were massive, dwarfing the Council's largest ships by a factor of 3. Along the flanks of the lead dreadnought, massive white letters were painted. UNS Somme. "What are those?" Vrek whispered, his voice trembling as he stared at the projection. "Those," Kevin said, his eyes hard and cold, "are our war crimes." The Vorn swarm registered the new arrivals. The red dots shifted, swarming toward the human fleet, expecting another easy kill. They accelerated, planning to ram the human ships and overwhelm their plasma shields. "They are moving to intercept," Taurus said, panic rising again. "They will ram your ships. They don't have shields." "We don't use plasma shields, General. We use armor, and we don't let the enemy get close." Kevin grabbed a comms microphone from the console, linking directly to the human fleet's command frequency. "Admiral Cole, you have a target-rich environment. Weapons free." A voice crackled over the room's speakers. A human voice, cold and professional. "Copy that, Actual. Firing main batteries." The council delegates watched in stunned horror. They were used to elegant beams of plasma, graceful torpedo trajectories. The human fleet didn't use plasma, they used kinetics. Along the spine of the UNS Somme, massive railguns fired. There were no bright flashes of energy, just the brutal, concussive recoil of solid tungsten slugs accelerating to a fraction of the speed of light. The hologram lit up. Not with elegant blue lines, but with a wall of sheer kinetic devastation. The tungsten rounds hit the front lines of the Vorn swarm. The biomechanical ships didn't just explode, they shattered, atomized by the sheer physics of the impact. The rounds didn't stop. They punched through the first ship, the second, the third, tearing a massive, gaping hole through the heart of the swarm. The Vorn advance faltered. For the first time in the war, the red tide stopped moving forward. Taurus fell back into his chair, his scales turning entirely pale. He looked from the slaughter on the hologram to the human standing next to him. Kevin Marshall wasn't smiling anymore. He watched the slaughter of the Vorn with cold, clinical satisfaction. "You," Vrek choked out, pointing a trembling claw at Kevin. "You lied to us. You are not farmers." Kevin looked at the High Counselor. The cynical exhaustion of 70 years of pretending finally washed away, leaving only the grim reality of his species. "We are farmers, Counselor," Kevin said softly, "but today we are harvesting." For exactly 12 seconds, the Vorn swarm stopped. It was an unprecedented behavioral shift. Across 50 star systems and countless engagements, the biomechanical locusts had never hesitated. They operated on a decentralized hive imperative, a biological algorithm that only knew acceleration, consumption, and replication. But the sheer, localized trauma inflicted by the human kinetic strike had severed their synaptic command web. General Taurus leaned so far over the hollow table, his chin nearly scraped the projector glass. His slit pupils were blown wide, dilating in the harsh glare of the tactical feed. "They don't have energy shielding," Taurus breathed. He wasn't talking to Kevin. He was talking to himself, his military paradigm violently unspooling. "They just absorbed it, and those projectiles, the mass, the velocity, the energy requirements to accelerate physical matter to that speed is entirely inefficient," Kevin finished for him, his voice dry as cracked earth. "It requires massive power plants. It stresses the ship's superstructure. It requires millions of tons of mined tungsten and depleted uranium. But it has one distinct advantage over your plasma lasers, General." Taurus finally looked at him. "What?" "Plasma dissipates, shields refract it, but a 2-ton slug of solid tungsten traveling at 3%, the speed of light doesn't care about your refraction index." Kevin pointed at the devastated front line of the Vorn. "Sir Isaac Newton is the deadliest son of a bitch in space." The 12 seconds of silence ended. The Vorn swarm recalculated. The algorithm adjusted to the new variable. The red dots on the hologram pulsed, shifting their formation from a localized wave into a dense, sprawling net. They recognized that a frontal assault against railgun batteries was suicide. They adapted. Thousands of smaller, jagged signatures detached from the main Vorn capital ships. Boarding pods. They were fast, heavily armored with biological carapace, and entirely immune to standard council targeting software because they ran cold. "They are swarming," Rek rasped, his claws digging trenches into his armrests. "They did this at Syria. They closed the distance and bore into the hull. Your ships are too slow. They cannot dodge." Over the open comm channel, Admiral Cole's voice cut through the ambient panic of the council chamber. "Sensors show multiple fast attack craft inbound. Microsignatures, boarding parties. All ships spin up point defense networks. Let's make it rain, people." In council warfare, point defense involved highly synchronized lasers designed to melt incoming torpedoes. It was clean. It was precise. Human point defense was neither. On the holographic display, the space between the human fleet and the incoming Vorn boarding pods erupted into a chaotic, overlapping storm of localized explosions. To the aliens in the room, it looked like the human ships were malfunctioning, detonating their own armor. "What are they doing?" Taurus yelled over the rising static on the comms. "They are firing into empty space. Their targeting arrays must be damaged." "They aren't aiming at the ships, General," Kevin said, watching the brutal geometry of the defense grid. "They are aiming at the space the ships are about to occupy." It was flak, an ancient, crude, and profoundly effective concept. The human ships were filling the vacuum with millions of jagged pieces of shrapnel, creating an impassable wall of flying metal. The Vorn boarding pods hit the shrapnel clouds at high velocity. At those speeds, a bolt the size of a human thumb had the kinetic energy of a bomb. The hologram registered thousands of micro-impacts. The red dots representing the boarding pods didn't just disappear, they were shredded into particulate matter. The biomechanical carapaces that had casually deflected Council plasma beams were chewed into meat and scrap metal by the sheer volume of human shrapnel. The few pods that made it through the flak screen met the close-in weapon systems. Rotary cannons, thousands of rounds a second, spitting streams of depleted uranium tracer fire that painted the dark void with angry streaks of red and yellow. A Vorn pod slammed into the thick, angular armor of a human destroyer. Taurus held his breath. He had seen this happen 100 times. The pod would attach, its acid borers would melt the hull, and the slaughter would begin inside. The pod struck. The destroyer shuddered. And then, the heavy explosive reactive armor lining the ship's hull detonated outward. The blast blew the Vorn pod back into space, a mangled, burning wreck, while the human ship's primary hull remained perfectly intact. Taurus slumped back against the console. Reactive armor, you strapped explosives to your own ships. When something tries to bite you, Kevin said, his eyes fixed on the slaughter, you make sure it loses its teeth. High Counselor Vrek was trembling, not from the Vorn. He was staring at the telemetry data of the human fleet. Ambassador Marshall, the ammunition, the sheer volume of mass your ships are expending. This fleet, it must have taken decades to stockpile this. Your entire agricultural surplus. We didn't build this fleet with our surplus, Counselor, Kevin said, turning to look at the alien leader. The cynical facade was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. We built it with our deficit. We starved for this fleet. We rationed our water. We delayed medical advancements. We poured our entire gross domestic product into a black budget for 50 years. Vrek looked horrified. Why? We gave you a paradise. We offered you peace. Because we know how the universe works, Kevin whispered. You looked at the stars and saw poetry. We looked at the stars and saw a dark forest. And we knew, eventually, we would meet the wolves. The battle at the Helion Gate was not a tactical masterpiece. It was a meat grinder. The Vorn had the advantage of numbers, an endless tide of biomass fueled by the consumption of a dozen outer rim worlds. Humanity had the advantage of profound industrialized spite. For 2 hours, the Grand Assembly watched in silence. There was no cheering. There was no relief. There was only the horrifying realization of what Earth had hidden in the dark. The human fleet didn't maneuver with the grace of the Kalan armada. They fought like brawlers in a confined alleyway. They took hits. Their heavy armor boiled and scarred under Vorn acid spitters, but they held the line, anchoring themselves around the UNS Somme, turning the slipspace gate into an anvil upon which the Vorn were being hammered. Then, the tactical map blared a localized alarm. A massive, slow-moving signature pushed through the center of the Vorn lines. It was a Leviathan-class hive ship. It was roughly the size of Earth's moon, a terrifying amalgamation of dark rock, pulsating bioluminescent veins, and jagged metallic protrusions. It didn't have weapons in the traditional sense. It was the weapon. Its gravitational pull alone was beginning to disrupt the human destroyer's formations. It's moving to ram the center line, Taurus stated, his voice hollow. If it breaks the formation, the swarm will pour through the gap. You have to order your ships to scatter. Kevin didn't touch the comms. He just watched. Actual, this is Cole, the radio crackled. The Admiral didn't sound panicked. He sounded tired. Leviathan inbound, initiating Archangel protocols. Godspeed, Admiral, Kevin replied softly. What is Archangel? Rek asked, shrinking back into his molted feathers. On the holographic display, the UNS Somme and 3 adjacent heavy cruisers stopped firing their main batteries. They rerouted all auxiliary power to their forward bays. Long, heavy cylindrical tubes extended from their ventral hulls. They weren't railguns. Council Treaty 409-B, Kevin said, his voice dropping to a low, grim monotone. The absolute prohibition of atomic and thermonuclear weaponry in localized space combat. You banned it because it irradiates battlefields. You banned it because it's cruel. Taurus's eyes snapped to Kevin. You didn't. We signed the treaty, Kevin said. We just ignored it. Fox 1, Admiral Cole ordered over the channel. Fox 2, Fox 3. Dozens of heavy missiles painted in dull, radar-absorbent black slipped from the launch tubes. They didn't have fusion drives. They used chemical thrusters, burning cold and fast. The Vorn Leviathan ignored them. It didn't recognize them as threats. They lacked the massive kinetic signature of a railgun slug or the blinding heat of a plasma torpedo. The missiles impacted the surface of the Hive ship. They didn't detonate on contact. They used heavy tungsten penetrators to punch deep into the biomechanical crust, burying themselves in the fleshy, pulsating interior of the dreadnought. There was a 3-second delay. Then the void broke open. The holographic display in the Grand Assembly whited out. The optical sensors on the telemetry buoys automatically shuttered, trying to compensate for the sudden, blinding birth of 30 miniature suns inside the Vorn ship. When the sensors compensated and the image returned, the Leviathan was gone. In its place was an expanding cloud of superheated plasma, irradiated ash, and vaporized biometal. The shock wave of the thermonuclear detonations ripped through the vacuum, carrying shattered pieces of the Hive ship outward like a shotgun blast. The resulting EMP and localized radiation storms instantly scrambled the Vorn swarm's neural connection. The red dots on the map froze. The algorithm broke entirely. All ships! Cole's voice barked through the static, thick with the adrenaline of the kill. The hive mind is stunned. Advance and sweep. Leave nothing alive. The heavy human dreadnoughts engaged their main drives, pushing straight into the radioactive cloud, their heavy shielding shrugging off the fallout. They fired point-blank into the paralyzed Vorn swarm. It was a massacre. In the Grand Assembly, the silence was absolute. Kevin reached up and pulled the earpiece out. He wrapped the wire neatly around the black transmitter and placed it back into his briefcase. He snapped the latches shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the massive, quiet room. He picked up his uniform jacket from the floor. He dusted off the lapels, folding it over his arm. He looked at High Counselor Rek. He looked at General Taurus. They were staring at him, not with gratitude, not with relief that their capital had been saved. They were looking at him with pure, unadulterated terror. Kevin felt a bitter ache in his chest. This was what he had dreaded for a decade of diplomatic service. He had spent years smiling, bowing, drinking awful alien tea, and pretending to care about grain tariffs. He had done it because he wanted humanity to be part of the light. He wanted Earth to outgrow its bloody, violent history. He wanted us to be better. But the universe didn't want better. The universe wanted a butcher. "The Vorn vanguard is broken," Kevin said quietly, adjusting his cuffs. "Admiral Cole will secure the Helion Gate. Earth will deploy the second and third fleets by tomorrow to begin clearing the occupied sectors. You will have your worlds back, Counselor." Vrek swallowed hard, his throat clicking. "At what cost, Ambassador?" "We don't send bills," Kevin said. He turned and began to walk up the obsidian steps toward the exit. He didn't look back. He knew what came next. There would be no more invitations to the grand galas. There would be no more patronizing lectures about agriculture. The council would build up their borders. They would watch Earth with a paranoid, trembling vigilance. We had saved them, and for that, they would never forgive us. Humanity had stopped pretending. And Kevin Marshall had never felt so entirely alone. The Earth Embassy on Xylos Prime was a masterclass in psychological architecture. It had been designed 70 years ago by sociologists, not architects. The walls were painted in soothing, muted pastels. The corners were rounded. The furniture was plush, oversized, and deliberately non-threatening. It was a building meant to broadcast docility. It took exactly 40 minutes to tear it all apart. Kevin stood in the center of his office and watched the velvet drop. His aide, David, a young man who had spent the last 3 years pretending to be a junior agricultural liaison, was currently ripping an abstract painting off the wall. Behind the canvas was a biometric keypad. David keyed in a 12-digit cipher, and the pastel wall slid open, revealing a bank of heavy, military-grade quantum communicators. Across the room, 2 more embassy staff were unbolting the heavy mahogany desk, tossing the wooden panels aside to expose the reinforced steel command console hidden beneath. Nobody was smiling. The carefully cultivated human warmth, the eager, wide-eyed enthusiasm they had worn like second skins, was gone. In its place was the grim, mechanical efficiency of a military command center going hot. Kevin walked over to the newly exposed wash basin in the corner. He turned the tap, splashing freezing water over his face. He scrubbed at his eyes until he saw stars. When he looked up, the mirror reflected an old, exhausted man. He gripped the edges of the porcelain sink. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the massive crashing come-down of a decades-long adrenaline high. The lie was over. He didn't have to pretend anymore. He found that he missed the lie. "Sir," David said. His voice had dropped an octave. The diplomatic lisp he usually affected was entirely gone. "Secure link with the UNS Somme is established. Admiral Cole is holding." Kevin grabbed a towel, dried his face, and walked over to the steel console. He hit the primary receiver. The holographic projector flickered, struggling with the massive distance and the lingering radiation of the Helion Gate. Admiral Thomas Cole flickered into existence. The projection was heavily pixelated, laced with the yellow static of hard radiation. Cole looked like hell. His crisp navy blue uniform was stained with something dark and slick. A hastily applied bio-bandage covered the left side of his jaw. Behind him, the bridge of the dreadnought was a chaotic mess of sparking conduits and localized smoke. "Report, Tom," Kevin said, his voice flat. Cole let out a long, ragged exhale. "The Helion Gate is secure. The Vorn vanguard is completely neutralized. We are currently engaged in cleanup operations, hunting down stragglers in the asteroid belt. They aren't putting up much of a fight without the hive ship broadcasting commands. They're just bugs acting on instinct now. Casualties? Cole hesitated. The silence hung heavy in the room, cutting through the hum of the cooling fans. The butcher's bill is steep, Kevin, Cole said softly. The Vorn swarm was denser than telemetry predicted. We took the brunt of the kinetic impacts before the Archangel strike. We lost the Bismarck and the Königsberg. Complete structural failure. Handful of escape pods made it out, but most went down with the ships. The Somme took a hit to our port engine block. We're bleeding reactor coolant. We have over 4,000 confirmed KIA across the fleet. Double that in wounded. Kevin closed his eyes. 4,000 dead. 4,000 sons and daughters who had been hidden away in deep space, living in cramped metal boxes, waiting for a day they prayed would never come. They had died to protect an alien coalition that viewed them as glorified pets. I'll notify command to begin drafting the letters, Kevin said, forcing the words through a tight throat. Can you hold the gate? We can hold it, Cole said, his voice hardening. The Second Fleet drops out of slipspace in 6 hours to relieve us. We're deploying automated mining rigs to scoop up the Vorn wreckage. We'll melt it down and patch our armor. But Kevin, the radiation from the warheads is drifting toward the inner system. It's going to poison the dead worlds on the rim. Let it, Kevin said. The Council doesn't care about the rim right now. They're too busy wetting themselves in the core. You hold the line, Tom. I'll handle the politics. Watch your back down there, Actual. They know we have teeth now. People who are scared of dogs tend to shoot them. I know. Command out. Kevin cut the feed. The hologram vanished, plunging the corner of the office back into shadow. He turned back to the room. The embassy was fully transformed. Screens glowed with orbital tracking data, troop movements, and supply logistics. The pastel walls felt like a sick joke against the cold, hard light of the tactical displays. David, Kevin called out. Sir? Get me a clean uniform, not the diplomatic dress. Get me the grays. David nodded. Yes, sir. The Council has already sent 3 couriers. They are demanding your presence in the private chambers. They want a debriefing. They don't want a debriefing, Kevin muttered, pulling his ruined white shirt over his head and tossing it onto the floor. They want to build a cage. He looked at the tactical map. The blue icons of the human fleet were clustered around the Helion Gate, a tiny, fragile dam holding back a massive, dark ocean. We bled for them today, Kevin thought, and tomorrow they will ask us why we made such a mess. The private chambers of the High Council were vastly different from the Grand Assembly. There were no sweeping amphitheaters here, no public galleries. It was a tight circular room built from pale, unpolished stone. It felt like a bunker or an interrogation cell. Kevin walked through the heavy blast doors wearing the slate-gray service uniform of Earth Command. It had no medals, no decorative sashes, and no gold braid. It was austere, functional, and brutally severe. 6 Kalan honor guards lined the walls, gripping heavy kinetic halberds. As Kevin stepped into the room, their grips visibly tightened. One of them actually took a half step backward. Good, Kevin thought. High Counselor Vrek sat at a semicircular table, flanked by General Taurus and a third figure Kevin recognized as Arbiter Korin, the Council's chief legal authority. None of them offered Kevin a seat. Ambassador Marshall, Freck began. His voice lacked its usual booming resonance. It sounded thin, stretched tight over a framework of pure anxiety. The Council acknowledges the intervention of the human fleet. The Helion Gate remains secure. You're welcome, Kevin said. He didn't bow. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his feet planted shoulder-width apart. Taurus bristled, his scales shifting in a wave of agitated gray. Do not act as if you have done us a favor, human. You violated over 40 interstellar treaties. You utilized unsanctioned thermonuclear weapons. You deployed kinetic mass drivers capable of cracking small moons. You have brought weapons of mass destruction into Council space. I brought a fire extinguisher to a burning house, General, Kevin shot back, his voice dangerously calm. If I hadn't, you would be taking this meeting inside the stomach of a Vorn Leviathan. We are not here to debate the past, Arbiter Corrin interjected. The alien possessed a slender, mantis-like frame and spoke through an artificial vocalizer that flattened all emotion. We are here to establish the parameters of the future. The Galactic Council cannot allow a member species to possess an unregulated, hidden armada. It shifts the balance of power. It creates an unacceptable risk. Corrin slid a thin, transparent datapad across the polished stone table. It stopped near the edge, hovering slightly above the surface. Kevin didn't pick it up. He looked down at it. What is this? The Proliferation Accords, Rex said. He leaned forward, trying to project authority. It is an addendum to your species' membership treaty. It stipulates that Earth Command must immediately surrender all tactical telemetry of your fleet. You will cap your naval tonnage at current levels, and you will place your dreadnoughts under the direct command of General Taurus and the Council's military branch. Kevin stared at the High Counselor. For a moment, the sheer, staggering audacity of the demand left him speechless. They had almost died 3 hours ago. The ashes of their outer colonies were still drifting in the void, and their first instinct was bureaucratic subjugation. Kevin let out a low, humorless laugh. It echoed off the pale stone walls. You think this is amusing? Taurus snarled, stepping around the table. Kevin stopped laughing. He looked up, his eyes locking onto the massive Kalen general. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I think you are fundamentally disconnected from reality, Kevin said. He stepped forward, closing the distance to the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Let me explain exactly what is going to happen, counselors. Kevin pointed a finger at the transparent datapad. I am not signing that. Earth is not signing that. We are not turning over our ships. We are not capping our tonnage. And we are absolutely not placing our men and women under the command of a general who thinks drawing a sword in a gunfight is a viable tactical doctrine. You are defying the Council, Freck shouted, his feathers puffing out in an instinctive threat display. We will impose sanctions. We will blockade your trade routes. We will embargo your agricultural exports. Do it, Kevin said coldly. Embargo us. Blockade us. Cut off our trade. See how long you survive. Kevin placed both hands flat on the table, leaning in close to the alien leaders. You still don't get it. You think the war is over because we blew up one hive ship. The Vorn aren't a nation state. They don't surrender. That Leviathan was just the scouting force. When the hive mind recovers from the EMP, they are going to realize that the Helion Gate is the only thing standing between them and the softest, richest buffet in the galaxy. He looked at Rek, then Corin, and finally Taurus. He held their gaze, forcing them to look into the eyes of an apex predator. Right now, the Second Fleet is moving into the Outer Rim. We are going to dig trenches in the void. We are going to mine the choke points. We are going to burn the occupied worlds to deny them biomass. And we are going to fight a grinding, ugly, horrific war of attrition. We are going to do the things that make you sick to your stomachs. We are going to commit the sins you are too civilized to commit. Kevin straightened up, adjusting the cuffs of his gray uniform. You want to pass treaties? Pass them. You want to call us monsters in your assembly halls? Call us monsters. We don't care anymore, but you do not give us orders. Kevin turned his back on the High Council and began walking toward the heavy blast doors. Ambassador, Vrek called out. His voice was no longer angry. It was just tired. If you do this, if you establish yourselves as this unchecked military force, you will have no friends in this galaxy. You will be feared. You will be hated. You will be entirely alone. Kevin paused at the threshold. He looked over his shoulder, the cynical mask finally replaced by a grim, unbreakable resolve. We were always alone, Rek. We just got tired of playing dress-up. The heavy doors hissed shut behind him, leaving the Galactic Council in silence, trapped in a cage of their own making. Captain James Miller stood on the enclosed bridge of the heavy cruiser UNS Agincourt, his hands clasped behind his back. He was a quiet man. He didn't possess the booming charisma of a holovid commander, nor the aristocratic arrogance of the Kalen fleet officers. He was a former logistics director from the Jupiter shipyards. He understood supply chains, heat dissipation, and the brutal, unforgiving math of deep space combat. Right now, the math dictated murder. Beneath the Agincourt lay the colony world of Talos IV, a lush, temperate agricultural hub on the galactic rim. 72 hours ago, it boasted a population of 40 million. Today, it was a Vorn breeding ground. The biomechanical locusts had overrun the orbital defenses, landed by the millions, and immediately begun constructing massive, fleshy spires to convert the planet's flora and fauna into shipbuilding biomass. Targeting solutions locked, Captain, said Lieutenant Reed, her fingers flying across the haptic display. She sounded exhausted. Her uniform was stained with 3-day-old coffee and sweat. We have firing solutions on the primary gestation clusters, all batteries reporting green. Miller looked at the optical feed. The lush green continents of Talos IV were already turning a sickly, necrotic brown as the Vorn consumed the biosphere. Standing in the corner of the bridge was Sub-Commander Vale, a Kalen observer the Council had insisted on embedding with the human fleet. Vale looked nauseous. His gray scales were dull, and he kept clutching his translation unit as if it were a talisman. Captain, Vile rasped, stepping forward, there are still pockets of civilian life signs in the southern hemisphere. Millions of them. You cannot commence orbital bombardment. We must mount a rescue operation. We must send dropships. Miller didn't turn around. He kept his eyes locked on the optical feed. Lieutenant Reed, display the Vorn anti-air density in the southern hemisphere. The holographic globe in the center of the room shifted. A dense, angry red mesh appeared over the southern continent. It was a localized net of bioplasma batteries and airborne interceptors. A dropship wouldn't make it past the upper stratosphere, Miller said, his voice entirely devoid of inflection. They would be swatted out of the sky. We'd lose the rescue crews, the ships, and the civilians anyway. Then we wait, Vial pleaded, his reptilian eyes wide with horror. We break the blockade and slowly push them back. We fight with honor. There is no honor here, Sub-Commander. There is only geometry and time. Miller finally turned to look at the alien. The Vorn are multiplying at a rate of 400% every solar day. In exactly 1 week, Talos 4 will hatch a new Leviathan-class hive ship. That ship will carry enough biomass to overrun the next 3 systems. If I wait, the people down there die. And then the people in the next system die. And the next. Vial stared at the human, his jaw working but producing no sound. He had spent his entire military career studying the elegant, bloodless doctrines of the Council. He had never been forced to weigh millions of lives against billions in a span of 5 minutes. They are already dead, Sub-Commander, Miller said softly. The Vorn just haven't finished digesting them. Our job isn't to save Talos 4. Our job is to make sure it doesn't feed the swarm. Miller turned back to the main viewer. He took a slow, deep breath, feeling the crushing, monumental weight of the order he was about to give. This was the burden humanity had shielded the galaxy from. Lieutenant Reed, authorize the use of Class 4 incendiaries. Wide dispersal pattern. Burn it all. Aye, Captain. Firing main batteries. The Agincourt, along with the 4 destroyers flanking her, shuddered. The deep guttural thud of the mass drivers reverberated through the deck plates. They weren't firing armor-piercing tungsten today. They were firing massive specialized canisters packed with a hyper-reactive thermobaric compound. The canisters hit the atmosphere of Talos 4 and detonated at high altitude. From orbit, it looked as though the planet had suddenly caught fire. Massive rolling waves of blinding white heat swept across the continents. The thermobaric reactions didn't just burn. They consumed all the oxygen in the atmosphere, creating colossal, crushing vacuum implosions that shattered the massive Vorn gestation spires like glass. The optical feeds whited out. The thermal sensors spiked off the charts. Vial collapsed to his knees, his hands covering his face. A low, keening sound escaped his throat. He was weeping. He was mourning the 40 million souls and the pristine world that had just been vaporized in an instant of industrialized human pragmatism. Miller watched the planet burn until the firestorm finally began to recede, leaving behind a charred, lifeless sphere of black rock and ash. There was no joy on the bridge. There was no cheering. The human crew worked in complete, suffocating silence. When you fight monsters, you don't use a scalpel. You use a torch. "Helm," Miller ordered, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat. "Set a course for the next infected system. Reload the forward tubes." This was the Ash Line, a brutal, unforgiving perimeter carved into the galactic rim by the Earth fleet. For 3 agonizing months, the Vorn threw everything they had at the inner systems. And for 3 months, humanity traded space for time, sacrificing the outer colonies to deny the Vorn their fuel. It was ugly. It was an atrocity by Council standards. But it worked. The Vorn swarm, cut off from fresh biomass and constantly bleeding ships against human kinetic batteries, began to starve. Their terrifying localized hive minds grew sluggish. Their advance slowed, stalled, and finally broke against the unbreakable anvil of Earth's heavy armor. Humanity had stopped the apocalypse, but they had to burn 1/4 of the galaxy to do it. 6 months after the fall of the Helion Gate, Xylos Prime was unrecognizable. The grand open-air plazas of the capital were now choked with military checkpoints. The soothing pastel skies were scarred by the heavy, angular silhouettes of human orbital defense platforms. Earth Command hadn't asked for permission to build them. They had simply towed the massive, depleted uranium stations into orbit and locked them into position. Kevin Marshall sat in his office. He was no longer the ambassador. His official title, granted by Earth Command, was Director of Allied Strategic Integration. The alien dignitaries behind closed doors simply called him the Warden. The heavy steel door to his office hissed open. General Torres stepped inside. The Kalan general looked older. The vibrant, arrogant shine of his gray scales had dulled. He didn't wear his ceremonial armor anymore. He wore a simple, functional tunic. The war had finally beaten the pomp out of him. "Director Marshall," Torres said, offering a stiff, abbreviated bow. "General," Kevin replied, gesturing to a plain metal chair opposite his desk. "Have a seat. Have the civilian evacuation fleets from the Rim fully integrated into the core worlds?" Torres sat down heavily. "They have. The refugee crisis is severe. We are facing food shortages, unrest in the lower sectors. The Council is struggling to maintain order without the military surplus. I have authorized a diversion of Earth's remaining agricultural yields to Xylos," Kevin said, sliding a datapad across the desk. "It's synthetic protein, mostly. It tastes like wet cardboard, but it will keep your people from starving. Sign there." Torres looked at the datapad. He didn't sign it immediately. He looked up at Kevin. 3 more border worlds were glassed yesterday," Torres said quietly, "by your 5th Fleet." "They were compromised," Kevin said, not looking up from his own monitors. "The Vorn had seeded subterranean hatcheries. If we left them, we'd have 1 million borer ships at our backs in 2 months. Admiral Cole made the right call. It was a Kalan world, Kevin." Torres's voice broke. "It was my homeworld, my ancestral nesting grounds, gone, reduced to radioactive glass." Kevin finally stopped typing. He looked across the desk at the massive alien general. He felt a deep, familiar ache in his chest. He hated this. He hated what humanity had to be. But the alternative was extinction. "I know, General, and I am sorry, truly. But I told you 6 months ago, we don't fight with honor. We fight to survive." "Is there an end to it?" Torres asked, a desperate edge creeping into his tone. "The Vorn are retreating. Their numbers are decimated. They are pulling back into the deep void. Can we not stop the burning? Can we not rebuild?" Kevin stood up. He walked over to the massive tactical map dominating the back wall of his office. It showed the galaxy. The core worlds were glowing a safe, vibrant blue. But separating the core from the dark, uncharted void was a thick, jagged red line. The ash line. "The Vorn aren't retreating, General. They are consolidating," Kevin explained, tracing the red line with his finger. "They found a prey that bites back, so they are pulling back into the dark to breed, to mutate, and to figure out a way around our kinetic weapons. They might not come back for 10 years. They might not come back for a century. But they will come back." Kevin turned to face Torres. "We are not rebuilding the Outer Rim. It is now a permanent quarantine zone. Earth Command is establishing a continuous, heavily mined border. The Council species will remain in the core worlds. You will continue your art, your philosophy, your peaceful trade. You will have your paradise back." Taurus narrowed his eyes. And what will humanity do? We will man the wall, Kevin said simply. We are relocating our entire industrial base to the ash line. We will build dreadnoughts. We will stockpile munitions. We will keep our eyes on the dark. We will do the dirty, brutal work of keeping the monsters at bay. Taurus stood up. He looked at the human, a complex mixture of resentment, fear, and profound gratitude warring in his reptilian eyes. You are subjugating us, Taurus whispered. You are turning the Galactic Council into a protectorate, a pet. We are keeping you alive, Kevin corrected sharply. 70 years ago, we hid our nature because we were afraid you would see us as monsters. Now, we are embracing it because this universe needs a monster. You don't have to like us, Taurus. You don't even have to thank us, but you will stay behind the line. Taurus stared at Kevin for a long time. The Kalan general slowly reached out, picked up the stylus, and signed the agricultural treaty. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked out of the office, the heavy blast doors sealing shut behind him. Kevin was alone again. He walked over to the reinforced window of his office. Below him, the alien capital bustled with life. Citizens of a dozen different species hurried about their days, traumatized by the war, but alive. They were free to worry about politics and art and their families. They were safe. Kevin looked past the sprawling city, up toward the sky. It was daytime on Xylo's prime, but he knew what was up there in the dark. He knew about the cold vacuum, the radioactive ash, and the thousands of black-holed human dreadnoughts patrolling the silence. Humanity had finally stopped playing nice. We had put away the smiles, the apologies, and the velvet gloves. We had picked up the sword. We had become the terror of the void, the boogeymen of the galaxy, the ruthless wardens of the ash line. It was a lonely, bitter existence. It was a life of eternal vigilance and moral compromise. Kevin Marshall placed a hand against the cold glass, looking out at the stars. But, he thought, a grim, undeniable pride swelling in his chest. At least we're the ones holding the leash. If you felt the impact of that kinetic strike and loved seeing humanity take off the velvet gloves, hit that like button and let the algorithm know. Do you think Earth made the right call by burning the outer rim? Or did we cross the line from saviors to tyrants? Sound off in the comments below. Don't forget to share this with your fellow sci-fi fans and hit subscribe so you never miss another epic HFY story. Keep your eyes on the dark, man the wall, and I'll see you in the next video.